Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. Lately I've noticed that a lot of people like to pretend as if homophobia is a thing of the past. They like to act as if it was an issue that we have overcome as a country and as a culture. And sure, there have definitely been some strides in the right direction over the years. If we compare the US of the 1950s to today, for example, the difference is night and day. But to act as if homophobia isn't still a pressing societal issue is naive at the absolute least. Just look at the most recent World Cup held in a country where being gay is illegal and punishable with years in prison or even capital punishment, and everyone involved is expected to act as if that's acceptable. That's without even getting into the rampant misogyny and de facto slavery going on with migrant workers in Qatar, but let's stay focused. For however many strides have been made in this country in terms of LGBTQIA+ acceptance, it seems like the pendulum is swinging in the other direction now. There's a push on the right to abolish gay marriage, and trans people are the constant targets of harassment and open violence by psychotic bigots. If you take issue with me saying trans rights are human rights and calling out the disgusting hatred trans people receive as a marginalized group, then stop watching this video, leave this channel forever, and go fuck yourself, you hateful piece of shit. It is insane to me that it is considered a controversial statement to suggest that people deserve to live free from harassment who did nothing other than embrace who they really are. And this hatred isn't only coming from the deranged extremists, it's coming from prominent voices of influence. Countless politicians and celebrities are openly and vehemently anti-trans. J.K. Rowling, Dave Chappelle, Graham Linehan, and plenty of others can try to dress up their bigotry as radical feminism, but let's call it what it is: deplorable transphobia. TERF just means transphobic, that's it. With so many people dead set on painting trans and other queer people as groomers or whatever other hateful, inane rhetoric they're currently spewing, with all that happening, on-screen LGBT+ representation matters a lot. Far too often throughout the history of cinema, gay characters have been vilified. Until relatively recently, a gay character rarely factored into a film unless they were made the villain or the butt of some joke or otherwise painted in a negative, stereotypical light. Especially troublesome is the tendency that cross-dressing and/or trans characters, trans women especially it seems, are painted as psychotic, deranged murderers on screen. And I'm not talking about fringe little obscure propaganda movies written off as hateful trash. I'm talking about popular mainstream movies that are considered classics. We luckily don't see it too often these days, but it was a gross trend that went on for far too long. Take Sleepaway Camp, for example, a horror film most famous for its twist ending, where it is revealed that the young murderer audiences have been told is Angela is actually her brother Peter, who began masquerading as his sister after she died. This is an ending that you will typically see described as shocking, terrifying, and disturbing. But is it? Or is it really just regressive and problematic, as it boils down to, she was really a man and trans people are scary? That's what's being said there. Now, to be fair, I don't really think the point of Sleepaway Camp was any anti-trans message. At least not consciously. I think it's just ignorance, not necessarily hatred. But intent and impact can be two different things. And this is far from being an isolated incident. Hell, in 1 year alone, 1980, 3 movies came out that linked being gay with murder. Dressed to Kill, Cruising, and Windows, with Cruising being the only one that has enough wiggle room to be interpreted in multiple ways. Some consider it a net positive for showcasing the S&M subculture in an honest, non-judgmental way, while others consider it extremely harmful. The production was a notorious disaster, as it became the subject of protests from multiple gay rights groups when the script leaked before shooting started. Cruising was a notorious flop upon release, but has been re-evaluated more favorably over the years, though it does remain contentious. Friedkin really was only interested in using the S&M subculture as a setting, a backdrop for a murder mystery, essentially. His filmmaking style has always been inspired by his background in documentaries, with a high emphasis on realism and capturing details with authenticity. I think that's what he's trying to do here, and he does take some positive measures, like filming in real popular gay clubs and listing the actual gay people who happen to be there to be in the movie, instead of hiring a bunch of, straight extras to fill the club. I don't think he had any ill intent, and I think the film is at least mostly focused on showcasing without judgment, but that part's debatable. repeatable. And then the random scene where the huge guy in the cowboy hat and the jockstrap and nothing else inexplicably bursts into an interrogation room, that really throws everything out of whack when the movie acts like it doesn't demand any kind of explanation. I don't know what the hell the takeaway is supposed to be there.
Was that?
Did he show you his knife?
What did he hit me for?
Who paid for the room?
What was that?
Who paid for the room?
Windows is the least well-known of those three examples from 1980, but it's the most out-and-out hateful. It was also the only movie ever directed by Godfather cinematographer Gordon Willis. The message of Windows is essentially that any woman who has a sexual attraction to another woman is deranged and evil. Needless to say, that one's fucked. Dressed to Kill is the most acclaimed of those three, and it is a very well-made thriller, there's no denying that. But its messaging is also undeniably problematic. Similar to Sleepaway Camp, the big shocking twist is the reveal that the woman killing everyone is actually a man in drag. Actually, a more apt comparison than Sleepaway Camp is Psycho. The influence Hitchcock had on De Palma's filmmaking style is impossible to miss all across the board, and Dressed to Kill is basically De Palma's spin on Psycho. It even retains that extended mislead where the leading lady is killed off partway through before the real protagonist takes over. Given that the two films essentially have the same twist, it might come as a surprise to hear that I personally consider Dressed to Kill problematic, but I don't think it's an issue in Psycho. Nor do I consider Silence of the Lambs problematic in that way either, despite having a similar thing going on with the Buffalo Bill character. Now, I'm not going to come out here and say that Psycho and Silence of the Lambs are both 100% squeaky clean in terms of representation. There's definitely a way to interpret each as problematic. But let me try to break down why I think those two films can get a pass while Dressed to Kill does not. And like I said, Dressed to Kill, still a good movie. Like, I'd still give it a positive score, whatever, as a movie. This isn't the end-all, be-all of, I'm not trying to cancel Dressed to Kill or anything. Let's be clear about that. It essentially comes down to a nature versus nurture distinction, with Dressed to Kill painting its cross-dressing villain as evil by nature, equating any queer feelings with being mentally deranged. For Psycho and Silence of the Lambs, it comes down to nurture, the tormented upbringings of Norman Bates and James Gumb. Norman Bates isn't really any kind of LGBT character. He isn't knowingly cross-dressing out of any personal desire. He dresses as his mother specifically, and it's because he believes he is her in his fractured mind. James Gumb, aka Buffalo Bill, is an LGBT character on face value, however. I'm not someone who's in favor of treating LGBTQIA plus characters with kid gloves, for example. Queer characters should feel like real people with dimension. They should have strengths, but they should also have weaknesses, shortcomings, and faults, instead of being perfect little idealized tokens. That's not real representation, that's pandering and tokenism. A villain can be gay, obviously, but their sexual orientation can't be what makes them evil. That's just homophobia, plain and simple. Dressed to Kill implies that its villain is evil because they cross-dress. That's a problem. Silence of the Lambs smartly sidesteps this pitfall. James Gumb's desire to be a woman physically is not what makes Buffalo Bill an evil character. Also, Buffalo Bill isn't any kind of stand-in for everyone who's trans or everyone who cross-dresses, whereas Nature Dressed to Kill, using its reveal as a twist, paints LGBT plus people with a much broader brush. The film version doesn't get too deep into it, but in the book at least, Thomas Harris goes out of his way to make it clear that James Gumb's violent actions are not indicative of trans and or cross-dressing individuals. Gumb's sexual orientation and gender identity have no bearing on the crimes. Lecter outright says Gumb wasn't born a monster, but rather transformed into one through years of abuse. Gumb suffers from severe mental health issues, including BPD, and unlike Dressed to Kill, those mental health issues are not equated to Gumb's transition or cross-dressing desires. Perhaps the most thought-provoking backstory detail is the fact that Gumb repeatedly tried to receive gender-affirming surgery, but was denied by the hospitals, adding in an additional level of nuance and widening the backstory to include a little bit of social commentary on the country's healthcare system. If Gumb had received the surgery, then the skin suit made from murdered women wouldn't have been necessary. I mean, just think about that for a moment and all the implications it entails. There are countless other examples of bad trans representation in movies.
I've been trying to tell you all night, that girl, she's a guy.
A man dressed up as a girl.
That was a guy. Guy dressed up like a sailor. Look at that.
There's a whole disgusting trope in the comedy genre where a guy, often the main character, is attracted to a woman, then disgusted and outraged when they discover she's trans.
Are you?
Hey, you in Bangkok, sweetie. There's a reason they don't call it Bangkok.
Yeah. Oh, God.
This is Dr. Franz Blau of the Sex Change Clinic in Bethesda, Maryland.
Because before she came to our little clinic, she was Milton Moorhead of Syosset, Long Island. Hello. No! No!
She's a boy.
Yeah, well, we knew that.
Are you all right?
Fine. I'm just gonna go congratulate the others. See you.
Even extends into other genres a bit with films like The Crying Game. I suppose it's debatable whether or not The Crying Game is out and out offensive, but I'm personally really put off by any reveal that a character is trans being played as some big shocking twist, and then a character runs and throws up about it. And I would say especially in the case of The Crying Game, when said twist is abused by the marketing department as a hook to get people into the theater. I mean, just look at the way this movie was advertised. We could go on and on with negative examples, but at the end of the day, we're looking at a significant problem that has a pretty simple solution. All filmmakers need to do is avoid vilifying LGBTQIA plus characters on the basis of their identity. The broader issues of representation will take more work, but are of course worth addressing. The yearly SRI reports from GLAAD make it easy to track screen representation for the US film industry if anyone's interested. In 2017, GLAAD determined that only 12.8% of all major studio films contained a single LGBT plus character. And even amongst that slim 12.8%, 0 featured a trans character. Not a single studio film featured even one trans character. The next year, in 2018, LGBT representation rose to 18.2%, but again, 0 trans characters. 2019 was much the same. Only 18.6% of studio films featured any LGBT plus characters, and not a single studio film featured a trans character. The most recent report on films released in 2020 rose to 22.7% of studio films, including at least one LGBT plus character. But again, no trans characters. And before you start thinking 22% of studio movies having a queer character is a big step forward, it should be tempered by the knowledge that more than half of those movies featured their LGBT plus characters in less than 3 minutes of total screen time. We're not talking about significant characters in most instances. We're talking about tokenism in part. Ticking a box on representation isn't the same thing as real representation. This is a studio issue more than it is a creative issue. The lack of trans characters in studio movies is not for lack of trying on the screenwriters' parts. I personally know plenty of screenwriters telling trans stories and including trans characters in genre stories, and industry gatekeepers continue to push back against this. Quotes like, "Does this character have to be trans?" And "Couldn't you just make this character straight?" are the kinds of phrases that are still flung around with far too much regularity in this industry. If I can try to end on a positive note, even though they continue to face pushback, there are talented filmmakers out there working to improve LGBTQIA plus representation moving forward. And television and the independent film scene both make far more headway than the studio releases. The film industries of some other countries are far more progressive, though the opposite can also be said of other countries. And I do think it's useful to keep in mind that if you look in the right places, you'll find that there have been great trans characters on film for years, like in the work of Pedro Almodóvar, for example. If you want a super obscure-ass point of reference, you can even look in the exploitation horror genre. You can look back at the movie Angel, an obscure, trashy flick, very sleazy to be sure, but it has a trans character in it who feels like a real character and who is not the villain of the movie. The villain of the movie is a straight, cisgendered man, whereas a trans character is on the good side. That's pretty rare to see, and it's good to know that a positive representative character can sneak past the gatekeepers every once in a while. For one of the earliest examples of positive trans representation that I've seen, you can go all the way back to 1975 to one of my favorite films, Dog Day Afternoon. It's often a bit less discussed than other aspects of that movie, but the entire motivation to rob the bank in the first place is to get money for gender-affirming surgery. And to be clear, that's painted as like a noble endeavor, not like oh, aren't they evil? It's not that. It's you're on the bank robber's side. So it's not all bad, and there is hope for the future. Let's try to stay positive. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe to Brickwall Pictures if you want more stuff like this. Check out my novel if you want. It is about a newlywed gay couple taking a road trip through the South and falling prey to violent homophobia. The social commentary on themes like this is a major part of this book. Also, specifically, something I didn't touch on in this video that's a big part of this book is the intersection between religion, Christianity in particular, and homophobia. It is a horror novel, south of Mason-Dixon. Check the description for links to this if you feel like checking it out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. So long.